Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the All Me podcast. My name is Tavis Piattoly, Education Program Manager and Sports Dietitian for the Taylor Hooten Foundation, and today I'm excited to be your host. How many times have you heard you shouldn't be consuming a low-calorie sweetener? We've heard them called sugar substitutes, fake sweeteners, alternative sweeteners, as well as some claiming they're poison. What we do know is there are a variety of natural and alternative sweeteners on the market being consumed, as this is a $1.5 billion industry. Whether you use Equal, Sweet and Low, Splenda, Stevia, or another product, this market is continuing to grow and expects to grow to $1.8 billion by 2026. Should you be concerned about weight gain of consuming these products? What about your blood sugar? Will it spike and crash? Or do these sweeteners negatively impact your appetite? Also, what is the correct term for these sweeteners? In this episode, I'll be speaking with Dr. Richard Mattis, who has dedicated his research to examining these questions. We'll be discussing some groundbreaking research he conducted on the impact of various types of sweeteners on changes in body weight. We'll also discuss the impact they have on our appetite, blood sugar, and hunger levels. Dr. Mattis is a distinguished professor in the Department of Nutrition Science at Purdue University, where he is the director of the Public Health Graduate School program and the director of the Ingestive Behavior Research Center. He is currently the associate editor for the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Dr. Mattis received his Bachelor's of Science in Biology from the University of Michigan, his Master of Public Health from the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and his PhD in Human Nutrition from Cornell University. Dr. Mattis is also a registered dietitian. He has received numerous awards and honors, such as being inducted into the Purdue University Department of Food and Nutrition Hall of Fame, the Award for Excellence in Research, and the Elaine R. Monson Award for Outstanding Research Literature from the American Dietetic Association, amongst many other accolades along the way. Dr. Mattis, thank you for joining and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
This is going to be a really exciting topic today that we talk about on our alternative sweeteners. I know a lot of our listeners, and as a longtime dietitian, I've gotten so many questions. Is this stuff bad? Is this stuff good? What can we really consume? Is one better than the other? And I know especially this stuff causes weight gain. So we're going to discuss a lot of this in today's podcast. Before we do, though, I really want to kind of learn a little bit more and tell our listeners about your career path and what interested you in the field of academics and research.
I actually planned a career in public health and dietetics and started off in that direction, but attended a course on sensory function, taste and smell, and how that related to nutrition, and became fascinated with that. As a result, I took a bit of a pivot and spent 35 years doing clinical studies on how sensory science and nutrition science interact with each other, and studying the relationship, for example, between salt taste and hypertension, or fat taste and obesity, or sweet taste and diabetes and obesity as well. And that's really what brought me around to our work on low-calorie sweeteners.
It's really interesting how we get into our field. I was a pre-med student my first semester at LSU and discovered going out during the week on Thursday nights and realized if I'm going to pass biology, I can't do that. And I didn't do well, so I dropped out and withdrew from that class. And then was looking through a curriculum book and found dietetics and saw sports nutrition, walked into my first class. There was like 97 girls out of 100. I'm like, I got to be in the wrong place. It's really interesting how we find our career path. Now, let's talk about some of the topics you discuss in your research. What do you currently look at now in your research, especially around the world of alternative sweeteners?
There are a couple of different facets to the issue. One is, to what degree do they influence appetite? Do they, in fact, stimulate hunger or help with feelings of satiety? I'm interested in the basic mechanisms of their perception, and there's evolving science showing that the receptors for sweeteners are not only located in the oral cavity, that is on the tongue, but throughout our bodies, and what are the implications of that, and their effects on glycemia, blood sugar levels, and finally on body weight. Do they help with management of body weight, or are they an impediment to achieving weight goals?
Yeah, I know we're going to get diving into that really, really soon and kind of talking about, I'm going to ask some questions specifically about those outcomes that you found from your research. But first, let's dive into alternative sweeteners because there's a lot of misinformation I think gets circulated in the digital world, and it can get quite overwhelming for the consumer to understand, is this stuff something I should consume? First of all, what are alternative sweeteners and what are the major types consumers use today?
Yeah, it seems a very straightforward question, but it's a very good one because there is a lack of consensus on what we should call these compounds. We all agree that they are compounds that impart a sweet taste while providing a low amount of energy, low or no amount of energy. But some people refer to them as high-intensity sweeteners, and that's really not accurate because nothing is sweeter than about 9% sucrose. These compounds are referred to as high intensity only because it takes much less of them to get to that same sensation level, but they're not actually sweeter than sucrose. Some people refer to them as artificial sweeteners, and that's not accurate because stevia is a natural compound and it's in the class of sweeteners. Some call them non-caloric sweeteners, and that's not accurate because aspartame is really a protein. It's 2 amino acid protein, but it has as much energy as one would expect from a protein. Because we use it in such low amount, it's not contributing much energy to the diet, but it is caloric. Some refer to them as high potency sweeteners, and that technically is correct because, as I say, it takes very little to impart a strong sensation, but it implies a medicinal or toxicological sort of impression about these compounds, and they are in the food supply and in the doses that we encounter them really are not drugs. They are food ingredients. I don't find that to be a good terminology. So the short answer to your question actually is I think the most appropriate term is low-calorie sweetener. It conveys the primary purpose that people use them. It's understood by consumers. It's a reasonable descriptor for scientists. It seems to fit the bill.
I've learned something new because I've called them alternative. I've heard sugar substitutes and I've heard low-calorie sweeteners, but I think that gets overshadowed by so much negative press. So it's good to kind of hear what these things should be called. Now, let's break these low-calorie sweeteners down a little bit because I'm sure each one has their own unique properties and functions. What's the difference between aspartame, sucralose, and saccharin?
They are absolutely distinct chemical compounds. Their chemical structures are very different. The similarity is only that each of them binds to the sweet receptor on the tongue and elsewhere in the body. And when each of them binds, they impart a sweet sensation. And they can do that at very, very low concentrations, hence their utility in maintaining the palatability or the sweetness of foods without contributing energy. But that's really the only level that they are similar. And even at that, there are differences. For example, the different chemical structures of the compounds mean they bind to different locations on the sweet receptor, and that results in differences in intracellular signaling. When the sweetener binds to the receptor on a taste cell, there's a cascade of chemical reactions that occur within that cell. And because of the different binding characteristics of each of the different low-calorie sweeteners, you get a different pattern within the cell, and that results in a different sensation, different intensity for the different sweeteners, different time frames. Some are very rapid in their onset of sensation and short duration and a quick decay. Asulfame potassium, for example, would be in that category. Some have a long lag time before the sensation starts, and then it lasts a long time. Neotame is an example. And as a result of the different sensory properties, they elicit different physiological processes in the body with different health implications. So it's probably more accurate to say, how are they different rather than how similar they are? They're similar on far fewer properties.
In your research, you've examined the effects of low-calorie sweeteners on glycemic control, body weight, and appetite in lean adults. Now, let's talk about body weight first because I know that's kind of really the driver. People want to know, how does this impact my weight? What did you find in your science when it came to body weight?
This was really quite a surprise. As I just stated, each of these compounds has a different physiological effect in the body. And so one might hypothesize that it would lead to a different outcome in terms of body weight. Now, the prevailing view is that they all work by a common mechanism, that is, imparting sweetness without delivering energy and hence dilute the energy density of the diet and so are useful for weight management. But if that's not true, then you might expect differences in weight outcomes for the different sweeteners. And indeed, that's what we find. So we've just completed a clinical trial where we had people consuming sucrose in a beverage every day, and we consider that a positive control. We expected people to gain weight when we asked them to drink sucrose on a daily basis for 12 weeks. But then we also had different groups consuming saccharin, aspartame, stevia, and sucralose. All of them were matched on sweetness so that people couldn't tell the difference. And at the end of 12 weeks, what we found was that indeed people drinking the sucrose beverage gained weight, but the group consuming saccharin also gained weight, and in fact, an amount of weight that was comparable to the sucrose, which was very surprising to us. The aspartame and the stevia had really no effect, and the sucralose led to a steady decline in body weight. So by the end of our 12-week trial, there was a significant difference in body weight in the people consuming the sucrose or the saccharin compared to the sucralose. So they really did lead to different outcomes. Now, I want to hasten to say this is the first study to examine this question, and it's the only study that has provided evidence so far in this regard. And in science, we don't want to put too much faith in one study finding one outcome. We want to replicate it before we really have confidence that it's true. But we think the study was well done, and the results will hold up under scrutiny. But that's where the science stands now.
Yeah, I'm sure if the press gets that, they're going to be like, hey, don't consume sweet and low, which is saccharin, because it's going to cause weight gain. But I guess just out of my curiosity, is there any understanding of maybe why saccharin and sucrose had kind of the same outcome? I'm just curious.
No, we don't have a good explanation for that. And that is indeed the exact topic of our current research, to try to find the mechanism that might account for this. It is interesting to note, consumers are understandably confused about the role of these different low-calorie sweeteners in their diet. And in part, it's because there are mixed messages coming from the animal literature and the human literature and different study designs. Many of these sweeteners are not detectable by rodents. They have a different sensory system for sweetness than do humans. But one that is perceived as sweet in common is saccharin. And as a result, most of the animal literature has been based on studies using saccharin. And those studies, there are a number of animal studies that do show weight gain with saccharin use. I've been suspicious of those studies up until our current work, and it just may be that saccharin really is the unique compound that has the unexpected effect of promoting weight gain. But like I say, this has to be replicated. We did find in our work that saccharin led to a slightly higher hunger sensation than the other sweeteners, but we didn't find that it led to an increase in energy intake. Just being hungrier doesn't make one gain weight. If one is hungrier and acts on that and so takes in more energy, then it's a logical mechanism. So the fact that we didn't find an increase in energy intake leaves the mechanism for saccharin's effect still unanswered. It may be that the hypothesis that we're working on now is that perhaps it is influencing the bacteria in our intestines and altering the efficiency of absorption of energy from the foods that we do eat. But that's speculation. It's a study that we're doing now. We don't have an answer yet.
Fascinating stuff. And I know our listeners are going to love this information, and great information to kind of understand the differences and how these impact weight. And really excited to kind of see what research comes out from your lab in the near future. Now, we've talked about weight. Let's shift to the world of blood sugar control. In the nutrition world, as you know, there's a lot of focus on glycemic index. Grams of sugar and insulin and blood sugar function are fluctuations in regards to weight gain or obesity. Let's shift this to now the low-calorie sweeteners. What is the impact that these sweeteners may have on blood sugar, or is there one?
Our work and my interpretation of the literature is that low-calorie sweeteners do not have an impact on blood sugar levels. Now, if one is using low-calorie sweeteners and uses that as a license to eat other rapidly digestible carbohydrates, so you have, for example, a low-calorie sweetener in coffee and you're eating a pastry or confection of some sort, one might see a change in blood sugar, but it's not attributable to the low-calorie sweetener. It's the change in food choice that the use of low-calorie sweetener promoted. So if there is a phenomenon there, it's an indirect one. But the low-calorie sweetener, in my opinion, is not problematic. And I think a good analogy here is what causes traffic accidents. Do cars cause the accident, or is it the driver that causes the accident? And I think people would agree it's the driver. So it's not the sweetener that is associated with increased blood sugar. It's how people choose to use the sweetener that is potentially problematic.
So I want to kind of skip a question. It makes sense to ask this question next because a few things I've read is that the more low-calorie sweeteners we use, the more it tricks our brain into thinking that it's getting sugar, but it doesn't. So it increases our desire to eat foods that are very sweet, like a pastry, a cookie. And you kind of just mentioned, I've seen people in coffee shops that they're drinking their coffee and they're eating a big pastry. Here in New Orleans, it's Mardi Gras season, so they're consuming king cakes. The consumption of low-calorie sweeteners, do they increase the desire for us to eat these sweet foods?
That, too, is a very, very important question. And there are some large clinical studies underway, not ones that we're doing, but I know of them, that are trying to answer that because it's really a fundamental question. There is, in my opinion, a compelling body of science that indicates that familiarity with the sensory property of a food is a determinant of its acceptability. So if we are exposed to foods that are very sweet, we come to expect food to be sweet and want it to be sweet. And our preferred level of sweetness matches the exposure level. And so low-calorie sweeteners do maintain a high exposure level to sweetness and so would possibly contribute to a heightened desire for eating sweet foods. The same holds for saltiness. Eating salty food would promote the preference for foods that are very salty or exposure to eating foods that are high in fat. Familiarity is the key driver here. So if one uses low-calorie sweetened products on a regular basis, it would promote an expectation for people preferring sweet foods. I don't believe that it is a direct mechanism. It's not a neurally mediated drive system that is responsible. It is a more behavioral phenomenon. It's, think about it this way. It's easily described by looking at the different cuisines across the planet. We all prefer the foods that are natural cuisine. So some cultures like very spicy foods, some more bland, some more dairy products, some higher in protein. The flavor principles of every culture are different. There isn't a right and a wrong, but you prefer the one you're exposed to.
That's a great point. And kind of really, when we talk about appetite in foods, it leads to my next question that I don't think a lot of people understand that our appetite, specifically hunger and fullness, are controlled by various hormones like leptin and ghrelin, just to kind of name a few. But let's talk about how do low-calorie sweeteners impact our appetite, or do they impact our appetite at all?
So the animal literature would suggest that these low-calorie sweeteners do, in fact, elicit the secretion of some of these gut peptides, these hormones, gut hormones that you just described, and would argue that that has an impact on appetite and, as a consequence, food intake. However, the human literature on this is far less convincing. And indeed, it's very hard to demonstrate a direct link between low-calorie sweetener consumption, the release of gut peptides, and appetitive sensations. This may be that there are species differences here.
Yeah, and that's interesting to know because I'm sure people want to make sure there's certain things that they consume that doesn't impact their appetite. If anything, people are trying to control their appetite today because of the obesity epidemic we have in our country.
For somebody who studies appetite quite a bit, I would like to be able to confirm the underlying assumption that you're making there, and that is that an increased appetite is responsible for increased energy intake and its effects on body weight. But the reality is food intake is guided by much, much more than just appetite. On a regular basis, we don't eat when we are hungry just because of social custom and convenience and very obvious reasons. And we often eat when we're not hungry, again, for other reasons, boredom, just desire for sensory stimulation, not because we're actually hungry. So the actual correlation between appetite and food intake is not as straightforward as we would like it to be.
There's definitely a lot of mindless eating going on in this country, and
right.
A lot of research around that. So it's kind of funny to see that. We've talked about already in regards to what your lab has found in using low-calorie sweeteners in weight gain, especially in lean adults. Now, let's shift a little bit to maybe the overweight, obese adults. I'm not sure if you've looked at this area, but would we see the same response from an overweight, obese individual versus a lean individual, I guess, in metabolism of these low-calorie sweeteners, or maybe the outcome? Would we see the same outcome, like would saccharin maybe cause more weight gain? Or do we know?
Actually, the study I described to you where we found saccharin was promoting weight gain was in overweight and obese individuals. But having said that, I don't believe the literature shows that lean and overweight or individuals with overweight or obesity live in different sensory worlds. I think the literature shows that they perceive sweetness the same way, they metabolize nutrients the same way, that I would not expect differences between lean and obese.
Well, I think the biggest question and the final question I have for you today is our listeners are going to want to know is, are all low-calorie sweeteners equally effective, or is one more effective than others, or one more beneficial?
I get back to our study. I hate to draw a conclusion on just my own work and just one study at that, but it is the only study out there now that directly contrasted the effects of different low-calorie sweeteners. There are other trials, certainly, that compare aspartame to sucrose or sucralose to sucrose and so on. But I think ours is the only trial that actually compared the different low-calorie sweeteners against each other. And as I say, our evidence so far points to differences between them, with saccharin being more problematic for weight gain and sucralose being more beneficial. But that has to be replicated by another group, an independent trial, to give us confidence that it's real.
It's great that your lab has published that first study, and it's going to be interesting to see more research as it comes out, because this is a topic I see constantly. It's great information, and I know it's going to be information that we can use moving forward in some of the decisions we make with what we put in our body. So thanks for this quality information. Before we go, I know we have a short window today, just a couple more minutes before you have to get off, but I do have 3 curveball questions. I know you don't know what these questions are. This is kind of a round where we just like to throw stuff at you that is not related to the topic at all. The first question is, what is something unique about you that most people may not realize or just know about?
Well, I'm not a very secretive person.
Any hobbies, anything you enjoy doing?
I do try to live by the role model that we set for the population. I exercise regularly and eat moderately. I believe there is no better dietary advice than balance, moderation, and variety. There are a lot of specialty diets that are promoted. They come and they go. But in the end, I don't think there's better dietary advice than balance, moderation, and variety.
I agree. I think we're living in a time now where we demonize food and we label it good or bad or healthy, unhealthy. And I have colleagues and friends that are selling diet programs because they're making a lot of money off of it. And I love that approach, balance. There's no reason to not eat something you enjoy as long as it's balanced in a good balanced diet.
Humans are very adaptive, and we can tolerate fair swings in the composition of our diet and thrive on that. And again, look cross-culturally. There are people that thrive on high carbohydrate diets, a lot of people in Asian countries that way. And there are people that thrive on high protein diets, people in South America, for example, and in Brazil and Argentina. Humans are adaptive. There isn't one right diet. There are diets that are appropriate for one's lifestyle, and one has to find that balance.
I love it. That's why we're all so unique and different. What's the most unique place you visited? I guess maybe in the last 5 to 10 years, or just in general?
Well, I've had the opportunity, in science, one has the opportunity to travel to many countries and meet colleagues there. Science is the universal sort of common ground. So I have done a fair amount of work in Africa actually there more on the role of nuts in the diet, but met some wonderful people and had some wonderful experiences in Ghana, for example, and Benin.
So this last question might be the most difficult to answer because it's kind of broad. But if you had to be a superhero and had a superpower, what would that be?
I guess the Aquaman. I've been a swimmer my whole life.
That's interesting. It's always good
if there is an Aquaman.
Yeah. No, it's always good to hear what people want. It's like, I want to fly. So my daughter, she's like, Daddy, would you want to be under the sea or in the clouds? And I'm like, I don't want to be in the clouds because I can fly and see everything. So really, thank you so much for the time today. I know you had just a little bit of time, so I really appreciate all the information. Our listeners are going to love this and really looking forward to seeing some of your new research. And thanks again for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today.
Sure. Appreciate it. I hope it's useful.
Have a great day.
You too. So long.
I want to thank everyone for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the interview today with Dr. Richard Mattis. I want to thank Dr. Mattis again for taking the time. He had just a little bit of a window of time between his busy schedule to spend about 30 minutes with us to kind of explain these topics. I know this was a topic I learned a lot about. There's some things that I've educated myself about over the years, but still a lot of great information and research that he shared, as well as more information from his lab coming very, very soon. As an organization, we spend a lot of our time and energy traveling the country, speaking at schools, conferences, organizations, and a lot of different venues, Major League Baseball parks, on the topic of appearance and performance-enhancing substances and the dangers and the risk, high-risk supplements, as well as nutrition and supplement safety. If this is a topic that you would like to have at your school, conference, or organization, be sure to reach out to us and visit our website at taylorhooton.org. You can go to Taylor, Taylor, Hooton, HOOTON.org. If you'd like to donate, please consider making a donation to the Taylor Hooton Foundation. This will help us continue our mission to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. And you can go to taylorhooton.org/donate. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time today to listen to this podcast. Be sure to share it with your friends, share it on your social media, or share it with anyone that you feel would be of benefit for listening to the topics we cover. A lot of great information continuing to come. We have a lot of incredible guests scheduled for the rest of the year. So stay tuned. More great information coming from the All Me podcast. Have a wonderful day.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooton Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.